Welcome to a fashion doll shoes tutorial.
This time I'm going to do some plaster casting. These are the two molds from the previous video, and here you can see why you need that base. The explanation was a bit complicated, but it's this simple. You have cardboard, make a hole and put the mold there, and now you can use it for casting, and it will keep its shape as there's nothing pressing against the mold underneath. It's there against these two supports, and that's a very simple way of doing it, and it works. And then I have this experiment. It's the same mold but made a bit differently. The idea was that I started to think if it would be possible to use latex mold for these polymer clays. And latex is really soft, so pressing the clay into latex mold will definitely deform the mold, so it doesn't work right away, but I'm going to try to make a support for the mold and then use the clay. So the idea is that I'm going to fill this little plastic cup with plaster and then press the mold to the plaster, so I get a block of plaster with the shape of this mold, the shape of this mold in it. So when it's dry I can use it so that I'll put the mold into the hole in the plaster, and then I can press the clay into the mold as hard as I want to, and the mold will keep its shape. And once again, that's a theory, and we'll see how the practice goes. Now I have the plaster here, and it looks about right. Yep. And then these are so small, these heel molds, that it's best to use some sort of tool, maybe a spoon or something like that, to fill them. Pouring the plaster from the container would probably spill a lot of it everywhere but in the molds. Okay, let's see. It's a good thing to just try to get the air bubbles out, even though these will be covered with leather or something like that, so if there are some air bubbles in the surface, it's not that bad, but it's always a good idea to remove any air bubbles. Then I'll fill this, and I am going to make it all full. Well, maybe not all, that's enough. It's going to probably spill over, but I want to make sure that there's enough plaster. That looks like it was just right. And then, just to make sure the mold will stay in the plaster, I'm putting something to weigh it. If it's empty, it's too light, but I'm putting these little beads in. They will help the mold stay in place in the plaster and also to keep its correct shape. I could have put the master inside the mold, but this is easier as I can remove these before starting to remove the latex mold. Okay, and now all that needs to be done is to wait that the plaster hardens. It's about an hour later now, and these should be hard enough to remove from the molds. Just pull a little, you can see if it separates easily from the plaster, and the plaster is hard enough. And I have some excess plaster here, and the surface isn't quite even, so at this point the plaster is still, it's not quite dry, so it can be carved easily. Just remove any bumps to make the surface even. It doesn't need to be perfect because it won't show, but the result is better if you even it a little. So now it should be okay, and there was an air bubble here. That corner isn't quite right, but it won't show in the final version. Okay, let's see the other one. Just pull it like this. There's some excess here as well. It really depends on how thick the plaster is. If it's fairly thin, you won't get these bumps, but the way I mixed it, it was maybe a bit too thick. Could have been thinner, but the problem is I don't bother following the instructions. I just put in water, sort of approximating it. Just pour in some water, and if it looks like there's not enough, pour in more and then mix it. And sometimes it's a bit too much, in which case you can add plaster. And sometimes it's a bit too thick, but as long as you can get it into the mold, it's okay. There's a small air bubble, but otherwise this looks quite nice. Okay, and then we'll see about that experiment. First, going to remove those beads. And one thing I started to wonder is what will happen when I put clay into this latex mold, because I have no idea if the clay is going to stick to the latex or not. I really didn't think about that. It could be that it's impossible to use this for polymer clay, but we'll see when I try it. And this, okay, there was a big air bubble there, but yeah. And here we have the hole, and there are air bubbles, but those don't matter here because this is just the support for this mold. So here I have the castings, heels, and this. I'm going to leave this plaster piece in this plastic cup because that will help keep it in one piece. And now both this and the heels, they feel cold, and that's because they haven't dried yet. It's going to take probably about a day for these heels to dry, but this one is so big that it could take 2 days. When the plaster is in room temperature, then you know it's dry and it can be used. So I'll have to wait for this one to dry and then see how it works with this latex mold and polymer clay. It's the next day, and although this isn't probably quite dry yet, I think it should be dry enough, except that I'll need to dry this latex mold. I rinsed this with water just to get the powder out from inside because I don't want any of the powder on the clay. Okay, now it's dry outside. And one thing I forgot to mention about making this is that this hole, it needs to have all these sides, they need to be either vertical or sort of in V shape, so that the lowest part is narrower than the upper part. And this original mold, as you can see, it's slanted here and it poses a small problem. I drew a picture. This is the easiest way to explain this. This is the profile of the mold made with the original master, and this part here, you can see this is the plaster around here, and it's hard. So if you leave this end slanted, there's no way you can lift the mold off the hole once it's full. So I had to fill this part in the mold outside. I had to fill it with latex so it's vertical. And you can actually see it when I place this here. You can see these are lighter because the plaster is showing through, but this here is darker, and that's because there's latex. And when it's done this way, it's easy to lift it up, but if it was done this way without this part, you couldn't lift the full mold out. And that's, I hope you understood what I mean. It's a bit complicated to explain. Anyway, now I'm going to try and see what happens when I put the modeling clay into the mold, I'm using the same color I used for another pair of heels earlier, and that's because I got this at half price from a closeout sale, and I only bought it because of Miss Piggy. It fits her colors. So I'm going to make another pair of heels, and I have some leather that's approximately the same color, so maybe I could use these heels with that leather. And one thing I've been thinking about is if it will be possible to remove the piece from the mold immediately, or if I need to put it in the fridge first so that it gets colder and harder and then remove it. That's probably safer, but I'm going to try and see first if it works right away. But first I need to fill the mold. Just press it tightly there. Bit at a time. And I noticed that the decision to keep the plaster piece in the plastic cup, I would have had to do that anyway, because I tried and it seems that it's impossible to remove it from this plastic cup, so it's there for good. Now I think that should be full, and then we'll see what happens if it. Now you can see the shape is just right, and what happens? Oh, it doesn't stick. That's good news. And carefully getting it out, and let's see, trying to not distort. Okay, it's almost straight. Oop. It bends a little, not much. And of course you can straighten it when you get it out of the mold. It's always a good idea. Check. Doesn't matter what kind of mold you use. When you take the piece out, you check that it's correct, and you fix any problems that you can fix, like cutting out any excess or straightening it or whatever. But it seems to be working, so now I only need another one. Is that surface? Okay, there's a bit of unevenness there. Yeah, this is always the problem. I can't keep these things in my hands. And the bottom, it looks like it's not quite flat, but I'm not going to do anything about that. at this point, because it's easier to just straighten that by cutting after baking, because that also means that the glue will work better if there's cut surface. At least the PVA glue, it works better with this clay if the surface has been cut or sanded slightly. Just, damn it, stay in there. Okay, I wonder if that's full now. Probably. And of course there's the good thing that if the piece isn't quite right when you take it out, you just do it again. Okay. I probably should have rinsed the mold again before starting this second one, because water helps separating the modeling clay pieces from the molds. Come out. Okay. Then just okay, it looks like there might be something in the mold. There was the same unevenness as in the first piece. Right, and then straighten it, and well, they look similar enough. So now they only need to be baked and they're ready for use.